Good afternoon, and welcome to Living in the Promised Land. This is Mark Schmuller, your host. And we have a guest today, Pastor Larry Chitwood. We'll get to him in a second. But before that, I wanted to just highlight a couple of things that are in the news this week regarding immigration, but also regarding, the world as we see it. And that is the war in the war on Iran that the U.S. and Israel are embarking on, which involves uh, the U.S. is attacking from several countries in the region, so therefore they're the U.S. bases there are dragged in, and one of the main one of the main things this brings up is the inability of a protest movement within the United States of people, even from those countries, but certainly from Iran, who do not support what the United States is doing. Often in the United States, we have exiled communities that are welcomed here because they're exiled from a government or from, that the United States does not support, and therefore their voices are not heard in general, but certainly they're not going to be heard at a time when the United States is at war against their country. So that's an issue there. And also, there's been news today that up to 1,000 refugees from Afghanistan, which are still on U.S. military bases, which are still not quite here yet, and being processed and vetted all these years, are not being allowed to come to the United States. And, that is something that is, for the most part, supported by what's in Congress right now. And it's incredibly tragic. Um,
Mm.
and so, yeah, it's incredibly tragic. So, uh, on the good side of things, one of the positive things this week was that in South Florida, the Witness at the Border group had like an annual meeting. And at Alligator Alcatraz, they were out there in force all last week. They brought a lot of local news there. We've talked a lot about Florida on this show and the really difficult organizing that I've done, in Florida, and also that these folks are trying to do, and getting local media involved was really important. And so, um, especially with elections this year. So, um, there's some good local resistance there, and we see, we were talking before about the mayor of Philadelphia saying, "Okay, we've seen what ICE does in other cities. If you pull that in our city, our police are not only not going to assist you, but they will arrest you if you are committing crimes against our citizens." And you know, having just been in Philadelphia last week for a case, knowing the city a little bit, one thing that everybody, since I was a kid, and I grew up in Boston, which is not a soft city in any way, everybody will know is Philadelphia is a tough place. You got to really, I think per capita it might be tougher than New York. New York is overall, but I think per capita Philly's tough. And so if the mayor says I'm going to do that and it doesn't happen, people will remember. So that's gonna be pushing it. So uh, today we have Larry Chitwood, Pastor Larry Chitwood. Do you go by Reverend or Pastor?
Either one works. Yeah,
Either
brother
one.
Larry, just Larry works.
Larry to those who want to leave him untitled, but he still has the background, the knowledge, and that's what drives him to to besides his own core, but certainly the teachings and that he has and the um, preachings that he has drive him towards social justice and and specifically these days in Memphis, immigrant justice. So I met Larry when I was in Montgomery a few weeks ago, and I I did a couple of sort of thought podcasts comparing what I saw there regarding the civil rights movement and race, and what I learned really at this Legacy Museum from the Equal Justice Initiative. And like I mentioned, in the middle of that, there are three parts to it. In the middle is this amazing sculpture garden, and that's where I saw Larry speaking to one of the guards, and I said, and saw this amazing exhibit of an upside down lynching tree, a sculpture, which was incredible. And I came out and we were just talking, and he was saying, "Well, I'm in Memphis. And I said, well, Memphis is where we used to have our annual conference for 8, 9 years in a row. Think I've been to Memphis more than I used to say more than I would go to Georgetown in DC because it's expensive and there's not much there anymore for many throughout most of the 20 teens. From I was there every year for our annual immigration conference. Um, and I know a bit about the immigration situation in Memphis and also the activism in Memphis. People and also for those that stomach the State of the Union knows that the president has had his eyes on Memphis, and we hear it in the state legislature in Memphis. Memphis is one of those cities that they all like to go to have fun, and then they like to point fingers at them at the city. And so, Larry, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And again, I've said this to you before, but I want to say to you on record, thank you for the work you've done. Again, not only in the last 2 weeks or 2 years, but it's a lifetime commitment from your we shared a little bit about our story, and you told me what your major was in college, and this movement of this justice movement has been a part of who you are for a very long time, and it's an honor and a privilege just to to have a conversation with you. Thank you.
No, thank you. And when you were there, you were leading what was it, from Selma to Montgomery?
Yeah, so I'm a United Methodist pastor, and we had a group, an ecumenical group. It was mostly United Methodist from West Tennessee and Western Kentucky. And a pilgrimage was called Selma to Montgomery, the second annual Racial Healing, Racial Justice Pilgrimage. And what we do is we take people along from Nashville. Then the bus picks up people in Nashville and Memphis, and we move on to Selma. But the main focus is that we share our stories, that we hear stories from the past, and when we look for places where they might intersect with our stories, we hear stories from the present, from what's going on in those places. And then we commit ourselves to making that story a part of the new song that we sing when we leave that space, and committing to those people that we will tell their stories as well. So yeah, we had about 47 people, an ecumenical group, economically, racially, and gender diverse group, and it was a good time. I don't mean a good time. It was a good time, but it was very. We when we do those, the group that I lead that leads those pilgrimages, when we do those, we make it clearly understood with people that this is not a tourist trip. We're just not going to see sites in Selma or see sites in Birmingham or see sites in Montgomery or Memphis. That this is a pilgrimage where we engage with each other and with the community. And it was great to have a whole group that did that.
Yeah, I mean it's important that people um feel it in their souls of what they want in their communities, and it's really hard to just roll over people, but you also don't want to be too bogged down with, as someone said, things that are just nonsense, and will waste your
Mhm.
time. And this was kind of what I really was asking people a lot down in when I was in Montgomery, because I just felt like, wow, this is such a good town. Like people were, it's a majority black town. People that you didn't have the same, you didn't feel the power structures as much. You felt things a little bit more egalitarian. It's like I feel when I'm in sort of where I live here, which is an immigrant community where you're not it's sort of like there aren't the expensive places that some people go and not others. And what we even it's I don't live in an incredibly gentrified part of town, and they try it here a lot. And Montgomery was an interesting place for that, is that people were very easy and open, and I find that a lot throughout the country. And I think this is why when one of the reasons for this podcast is that I have to hold out the hope, and I think, maybe you do too, that when push comes to shove, people do not want to center their life on wondering where their neighbors from, and having, instead of curiosity, interest, and support, antipathy, that somehow there's this grand culture that's being um that's being grown. And it's really as somebody in the United States, for all of this disgusting, and we know, how who really the founding fathers were when it came to power, income, and non-revolutionary ideas and all that, there still is they still lit this candle of saying, you don't
Mm,
win because you come from a family. You don't
mm,
win because you are this family, this race, this region, this clan, this club. You don't do that. And it's such a central part of who we are as a country. If we have
mhm.
any identity, that's the best one. And so as these people are, trying to tell us that this is really an end to a civilization, um, and a culture, I think people, eh, when they start there, I think it does lose its traction. I don't know what your thinking is there.
Well, I mean, I'm just gonna I'm gonna call it for what it is. When we hear people in news media and politicians say that we're doing this to protect Western civilization, I, I'm I, I hear it clear as a bell, and I'm sure that my friends that are black and brown hear it also. That means white civilization. That means white European Christian civilization. That's what they're talking about when they talk about saving the West and Western civilization. And in all the crazy things we've heard come out of this war and that Israel talked us into in Iran, one of the craziest things was to hear a State Department spokesperson say this is to save the West, right? This war is to save the West. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, yeah, when it's, yeah, and so when you, uh, yeah, with, I mean, so with immigration, like within your state, there is a bill right now, and I know you're working on this, and I wrote a Substack piece on Oklahoma,
All right then.
because the same people that were took over New College, the ones that are, fighting on the educational front of what the ones who were censoring, well, they're censoring history. I mean, they did it in Philadelphia. I just saw they put the photos back up. I mean, the photos, the portraits back up of outside of George Washington's, White House,
Mhm.
at the foundation of African American, really heroism in Philadelphia
All
and
right.
during that period. And they took it down because they want people to erase what is the history. And that, when we talked about, in Springfield, Ohio, with Haitians, when you've got a certain amount of time in a place, you're not going to be able to erase the history any longer because the people are already there. And so you've got Tennessee, which has a lot of newer immigrants, but it is a very, quietly, Tennessee and North Carolina have really burgeoned their immigration populations in huge ways. And and really much of the labor market, the construction, and all of that is done by immigrant labor too, but also within the community. So you've got this school bill. So talk a little bit about this statewide school bill.
Well, so the idea that some in the state legislature have is that the first iteration was to deny a public education to children who were undocumented, whatever that means, right? Um, no one can give us a definition for that. I love it that Andy Ogles wants to say what is an undocumented person. There's nothing for that, but they want to exclude
Andy
undocumented
Ogles being a congressman from
from East Tennessee,
East Tennessee, yeah.
right? but so at first it was to completely exclude, and it's morphed into a bill that, as it does, as it moves through the process, um, into a bill that requires schools to document, to ascertain if their students are documented or undocumented, which puts a lot of pressure on every student and every family in that school. That means birth certificates for everyone, right? And all of those things. But more importantly, it means that we're denying something that the United States Supreme Court and our Constitution says is a human right, which is education for every person and every child, particularly within the boundaries of the United States of America. And so that's what they're pushing towards, and they're asking schools to self-report essentially. The pushback is coming, frankly, from some of the school systems in conservative areas because funding for schools, for local schools in the state of Tennessee and through the federal government's Department of Education's funding plan is dependent upon daily attendance. So the fewer students you have in attendance, the less dollars the school system receives. So what we are seeing already in Memphis and Shelby County in Tennessee is that immigrant parents are, number one, afraid to leave their homes to take their children to school. And number two, afraid to let their children leave the homes to go to school because they really don't know who's going to be disappeared next. So schools, especially in metropolitan areas like Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga, are already seeing decreased funding because of a slip in daily attendance. And this, this bill adds administrative cost. Somebody has to collect all this information, collate all this information, and then send it to the state of Tennessee. And no, there's nothing in the bill that includes support for that to these school systems. So that means even more money has to come out of the classroom to satisfy what essentially is just bigotry.
Right, and that what they're learning is you can't target an immigrant community without targeting the whole community, and you can't require segregated towns and schools. So you're going to have areas where you know even if the culture is to be segregated, and that culture of the idea that property values are lowered if black people are immigrants. I mean, you don't know. Sometimes people say if it's Asians, like whatever kind of bigotry controls things like a housing market or whatever, um, that's a privilege. Like people don't
Mm,
realize like that's a privilege. Like, okay, wealthier people can be more segregated, but you know, you're all kind of earning the same thing, doing the same jobs. You're going to be in the same neighborhoods, and your kids are going to be in school together. And, people have a lot of things to go on with their schools. They have their kids that need the public school, that need the services of the school. Those start getting cut,
mhm,
and they're being asked to sacrifice their own kids' well-being, and that really can be well-being, meaning health in the school, meaning all the different separate programs. And the first things that get cut are the special ed stuff, the special, needs things, and the extracurricular activities. So, the stories we hear of people that didn't roll up with a lot of money to have private musical lessons and all that. The school music teacher is there. The people
mhm,
that teach in those schools are often the most dedicated people, and guess who loses? Everybody. And so, um, and the idea is you're supposed to, like a lot of this agenda, you're supposed to suck it up because it's going to make things quote great again, and the great is uh is that doesn't hit these communities at all really. And so
mhm.
um and they're not going to attract teachers. One, if they can't
Mm,
pay them, and two, if it's demoralizing to have their students not show up, to have, you know, so much time spent, you can't have parents come in and have meetings or be helpful as much. And they're trying to disassociate it. And so it's interesting that these principals, it's happened in Alabama years ago too. The principals of the school said, we don't want that. And they were surprised. They were surprised because there's ideas and then there's what's on the ground.
yeah.
Um and I think they tend to distract people with the ideas, and then a lot of these communities, um like Uvalde. I mean, if Uvalde happened in a wealthy white suburb of Dallas, those cops would all be in jail right now for not protecting those kids. Probably.
Mm,
They would be on
mm.
trial. But they were like, okay, it's a poor community. And there were not only Latino kids, but also you know, lesser income, lower income,
Right.
um, white and black kids. So it's a different way of thinking. So what kind of so it's kind of frozen right now, this bill.
The bill's frozen. It's stalled out in committees. We've had an incredible response across the state of Tennessee, and especially from students in the Memphis area where I live. We just had a busload of students from a school I'm not going to mention travel to Nashville with a state agency to um, um, uh, advocate on behalf of their immigrant classmates who are being left out and abandoned. We've had walkouts in several public schools where the school students are standing up and saying, this is wrong. And people say, well, what good does a protest do? What good does it do if 100 students walk out of high school? All it is they missed a test or a quiz or an exam, or they didn't get to take their notes. But no, it makes a statement to the whole community. And it says that people in every walk of life, in every station of life, and in every age of life, recognize that the policies of this current government and administration are not life sustaining. They are diminishing life. And these students are proud enough to stand up, or bold enough, courageous enough to stand up and do that.
And do they face any? I know in Texas they were trying to get these students suspended. I mean, not counting their attendance. Are they facing backlash?
Yeah, they're trying to not count their attendance to get them suspended. There was a Charlie Kirk bill that was being put forward saying that two different bills in the state of Tennessee. In one iteration from my personal state senator, Paul Rose, and his plantation mentality, to say that if you get up and walk out of a right-wing MAGA event, you can be arrested for disrupting the event. And the bill specifically called out LGBTQIA plus persons, immigrant communities, and other persons in the margins that are pushed to the sides. And they were, but it didn't work the same way if someone from Turning Point went to a Black Lives Matter event and got up and walked out. They wouldn't be in trouble. So that's how ridiculous that bill has stalled out as well.
Yeah, I would imagine there might be some constitutional issues with that one.
That doesn't bother Tennessee
Right.
legislators.
Yeah.
I'll say we had a chance. The state of Tennessee has a chance to spend $5 million to get $80 million in government funds to feed children over the summer, and we won't spend that $5 million because it benefits black and brown children more so than rural children. So they're going to spend $2 million to feed children in rural counties, walk away from all that other money, but at the same time pass laws that they know that they're going to have to spend millions upon millions defending in federal court. And that's
So
how ridiculous it is.
So, this gets me to thinking because, I spent some time in Ohio this summer. I recorded in Springfield, and my host, I was telling you about my good friend. She works for the state of Ohio, and uh, monitoring school lunch programs for lower income people and other services that people get from the state. Some of it's care. Parents have to work. It's like more time, that people get in
Mhm.
from from people in school. That's really what it is more time, more attention for your student, for your child, and services. And when they cut, there were bills to cut this federally, and it affected her area is Appalachia, which is mostly white and not
Mhm.
high income, and they were ticked, and they were also ticked in other parts of the state in Cleveland. And also, it's always been the trick in the United States is how do you get people to realize, hey, th this is where your interest is. And so much of that happened, uh you know civil rights movement, etc., through interfaith coalitions, through people. And we all know in the South, I mean, especially much more than where I come from, people are very religious, no matter what their background is. People are very religious, and so mostly Christian, but very religious. And it's in and I'm wondering, if you see prophetic voices in your coalition, or this sort of talking to people who might not otherwise be supportive of the immigrant community, um, and getting them on board. Um,
Yeah, absolutely we have been. So I'm a part of a group called Micah, which is a Gamaliel group, which is faith-based, but it's interfaith. It's the Memphis um, Interfaith Community for Hope and Action, which brings together faith communities, and even people who don't consider themselves to be people of faith, to be a part of making a difference for the lives, and for the well-being of their neighbors, and combating injustice. I've seen it in prayer vigils we have. I'm part of a group called the Immigrant Relief Task Force, and we have monthly prayer vigils that move from church to church to church. And while most of us on that in that group are United Methodists, we are an ecumenical group. We've been at Presbyterian churches, non-denominational churches, Baptist churches, Episcopalian churches, Lutheran churches, to have that prayer vigil. And more, the people that I see in those settings are people that I don't expect to see. They're they're not people like me with a bunch of stickers on the back of their car. They're mostly conservative looking, white people of some means and privilege, who have come to a realization that what is happening in our neighborhoods and to our neighbors is wrong. And and re- uh, every faith has the same basic belief about humanity, and that's that God loves human beings and people. So whether you come from a Christian perspective, whether you come from a Jewish and Hebrew perspective, or a Muslim perspective, or Buddhist perspective, or Sikh perspective, we all come to this place of understanding the basic value of a human being. And two things have happened, I think. The absolute arrogance of the current administration to commit atrocities in the open, and then to support those atrocities with atrocious words publicly. That and then seeing the harm that's done and hearing the stories, and that's a part of what we do when we have our prayer vigils. We have time for singing. We have time for a lamentation, which in the Hebrew and Jewish and Christian traditions is crying out to God about the injustices that we're experiencing. But we also have time of short story sharing, where people who are migrants that may have been impacted by what's going on in our community, the injustices in our community. We hear from attorneys, immigration attorneys like you, who testify and tell the stories of how frustrating a system is that I don't know how what it was created to be, but what it has become is a totally inept and a system that's unable to do what it's tasked with doing, and the frustration of that. I can't imagine being in that space. But to share those stories, and that helps people see when people see, when people of conscience see, I don't care if they're black or white or rich or poor, but when they see that folks are doing everything they can do to obey the rules and to follow the regulations and to show up, and the system still disappears them and and traumatizes them. Pe People are there's a change in the community. And we just buried Jesse Jackson. God bless him and God rest his soul, but keep hope alive.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I actually wrote a Substack on him because I chaired his 1988 campaign when I was in college in Maryland. So
Mm,
yeah, so I know where he's, yeah, no, definitely it's really is about that. It's about not um about unifying on the things that matter, like really unifying.
yes.
And also understanding that there are forces that don't want that, and that's how you get non undemocratic power. And it also is so much as perception, and that's um you know why being in Montgomery hit me so hard was like,
Mm,
wow, this perception of what people are. They don't want to learn a language, and you don't want to sit and personally at this point I've reached a saturation point where the hardest thing for me is to have conversations with people to say, well, no, immigrants really do improve the economy, or they don't improve the economy, or it's like saying, well, no, Catholics don't really believe in this, or they don't believe that, like you're talking about people in ways. No, no, gay people are not really sex fiends they anymore. They're not predators. Like you're having to have this conversation for things that people almost, I'm almost where, Greg Stoker, we talked about before, was running for Congress in Austin, who's a veteran. He's got a great, following, a great podcast called Colonial Outcast. And he basically said to his fellow veterans, who are about military in the streets. I know they're in Memphis, they're in DC, about National Guard in the streets and these wars and everything. And he said, just guys, you gotta know what you're fighting, what they're sending you to fight for, and you gotta like grow up and look at your community. And that's the same thing. Like there's a certain point at this day and age where the people that are comforted by promoting straight up bigotry, which is a small unit of well organized people who know how to manipulate well and get into power and punch way above their weight. Um, and they're certainly not representative. I do not believe if anybody besides Donald Trump ran, besides having being an R after their name, that they would be attractive to people because they're not really representative of people out there. I mean, when I was in Ohio, people of all different stripes did not like JD Vance, and he barely won his election there. People don't talk
hmm
about that. He barely won. Trump won by like 14 because Trump is a charismatic star, and he distracts, and Trump can start talking about boxing and people are like, okay, boxing, because people don't have this foundation. He's the ultimate. But the ones who are focused on this agenda, walking around and saying, hey, you know what, we're going to clean your schools out. People are like, yeah, yeah, you need to, and you need to build a new gym, and you need to put a new library, and you need to do these things for my kids, and maybe they want a new football field, whatever it is. They want spending on things other than that. And the same thing with it's a taking away the focus. So that's I mean, that's good. That's interesting. So you've had some, like, as we call them, hard conversations with other pastors about moving them along.
Yeah, yeah. And moving forward, for me, I'm what Shane Claiborne and Tony Campolo called a red letter Christian. I believe that
Red
Jesus
letter
meant what
Christian.
he's a red letter Christian.
Okay.
So in the Bible, in the Christian Bible, in the old King James versions that we got when we were little kids, in the Old Testament was in the Bible, in the New Testament, but the words of Jesus in the New Testament, when Jesus actually spoke, those Bibles, those earlier Bibles would print those words in red. So the words of Jesus stood out in those Bibles, and we're I believe called to bring our attention to. I mean, there's a reason that the words of Jesus are highlighted. And so when I think about my faith and why I'm a Christian, I'm not saying that that's better than anyone else's faith. It makes me a better person. Other people's faith can do for them the same thing. I believe that. But when I read those letters in red in my Bible, those words that Jesus said, I can't help but feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit those who are sick and in prison, and welcome the stranger.
So for people who are lay people who haven't looked a lot into, I mean, they hear the term Christian nationalism while we're here. They hear the term, like why, like, and then for those of us on the outside who have been progressive, it's like I mean, how can that not be obvious to people? Like, how can you look at it, preach it differently? And we know how they did in the civil rights time because the segregation was so baked in. But in this day and age, like, what are you hearing from maybe the descendants of those folks or the people in your in other Christian pastors? I mean, do they sound more when you have a theological discussion, like where does it go when they're
Well, it, so if you want to have a theological discussion about that, it doesn't go very far because their theology breaks down rather quickly. Because what white and let's be honest, what the media has termed Christian nationalism with a capital C, I would give it a lowercase c because it has nothing to do with true Christianity, is in essence white nationalism and white supremacy. And so when I engage with people that support that, a theological argument doesn't exist. And what has happened for people is they've been given the permission, and it was the church, it was the Christian church, it was my church, the United Methodist Church, that gave people the permission to conflate and confuse their patriotism with their faith and their politics with their theology. And instead of their theology informing their politics, they want their politics to inform their theology. So they shape and reshape. I mean, that's the one of the tragedies of the Bible. It's been misused. Hebrew scripture and Christian scripture have been misused for 2,000 years to enslave and abuse people when that's not what either the Hebrew scriptures or the Christian scriptures are about. So it breaks down pretty quickly that way. But they just can't get away. They can't separate their patriotism. And as a white man, and seeing it in my mother, which was a hard thing to see, and others, a lot of it is fear based, right? Um, um, if we're wrong about this, what else are we wrong about? Right? And then the ultimate fear is, well, if we give people the freedom to do what we can do, will they treat us as badly as we treated them? What happens? What happens when there's more black and brown and Asian and people in this country than white Europeans? What's going to happen to us? And that's a fear that I think is a deep-seated fear behind Christian nationalism and white nationalism. And that's why we see J.D. Vance stand up and say, "Have more babies," you know. He doesn't say we're going to educate your babies. He doesn't say we're going to feed your babies. He doesn't say we're going to give your babies health care. He doesn't say we're going to make sure there's good jobs there for your babies. He just says have white babies.
Yeah, and he was really my where this really hit me was talking to people actually in a library in a small Lutheran college in uh Springfield. And they were and talking, I mean, Springfield is still scarred. They were still because of
Mm,
the people that came to town after, like the threatening the town, the bomb threats called in, the KKK marching down the street, the kind of takeover of their town, and they blame him for fomenting it because he's from Middleton, which is right nearby. And so, and he knew how to do that. He knew how to like take these Rust Belt areas and do that. And certainly, the South is always, on the is always going to have poverty. I mean, every city does, but there's places like Memphis there can be hanging on by a thread economically. It's easy to say, well, just move to a better school or it's worth it. And I think this is one of the reasons I saw another generation of people not wanting to do that, and it does become very dead end, because the alternative to that is, you're not going to have immigration. You're not going to have people coming in. You're going to have people leaving, and then you're
mm,
going to be, the South of the 1920s when black folks had all gone north and there was no industry and they were the level of poverty increased. And so I think this is something that's there. So the immigrant task force, the relief task force, how did that crop up?
So that group, we started in 2019 as a response to some of the southern border states, particularly Texas, who were taking migrants who came, we continue to say they came here illegally, but if you come here with no papers and you declare asylum, you are here legally. So they were taking migrants that were here for whatever reasons and putting them on buses and sending them across the country with no support established on the other end. And so a group of Methodists, United Methodists in the Memphis area, and that expanded to others, we began to just go to the bus station. We would get a heads up through the grapevine when a bus was leaving Texas, South Texas, right? And have an idea of when it would stop in Memphis, even though it was a chartered bus. And we just positioned ourselves at the bus station to provide hygiene products, food supplies, diapers, all of those things, any information that we could give, but mostly encouragement. And so we grew from that. And now we're an organization. We're really kind of on the down low. We're an ecumenical group. We're not organized or established in any way. I guess you would call us open source. Or what was the Wall Street movement? What did those kids call?
Occupy.
Yeah, Occupy. We don't have a leader. We do everything by consensus, but we have a pretty generous a fund and some pretty generous people that support us that allow us to do things like pay rent and utilities for mothers and fathers whose breadwinners have either been disappeared or unable to go to work. One of the most fulfilling things that we've done recently is help a family. We helped one family, a mother and two children, move back to the country that they immigrated here from when the government wanted to imprison the mother and the children in the meantime. And then recently we had a situation where the government disappeared the mother and the father, and two small children were left behind with no family here. And when we went to DHS, we were told, well, you need to turn them in and we'll put them in detention and we'll return them to their family once we establish who their family is and all sorts of things. And because of the complicated nature of migration, this family started walking in Venezuela and they had to walk through Colombia. A married couple, their children were born they were from one country, their children were born in another country, and they end up living in the United States and the parents are gone. So we've been able to raise enough funds, and it's over $5,000 to get the birth certificates and passports for these children, and give stipends to people to keep them in their homes in this 3 or 4 month process of trying to reunite a. You're kidding me, right?
Right. What kind of folks are donating?
Um, Everybody you can imagine. Doctors, um, lawyers, um, uh, street sweepers, everybody from the top to the bottom. Um, when when we have our prayer vigils, and we're having one this Thursday, and we have the opportunity to share these stories, um, it opens people's hearts. And when it opens people's hearts, it opens up their gifts, whatever they can give, their time, their talents, their service, their treasure in whatever way they can. But I've seen soccer moms from very conservative churches and very conservative communities. We've got them signed up to deliver groceries to families who are afraid to go out and shop for groceries, to be observers for ICE. So the community's coming together, and what we're seeing is, as the cruelty uh, increases, the compassion and empathy increases in the community as a response. And I actually, as a pastor, as a clergy person, as a theologian, would shape it the other way, saying that the greater the empathy is and the greater the support of the community is for the oppressed, then the harder the oppressor has to work, and the more cruel the oppressor has to be, because their opportunities for cruelty are decreased. But it's been amazing. It's been amazing to see how and the people and the churches, surprisingly, that have come forward to be a part of this.
No, that's really no, that's and I think that's a good note to end on because I think right now so many things are up in the air. We're not talking about victories. You haven't defeated this bill because it's going to keep coming up because there it is. I mean, there used to be oh God, I forget his name, and I'm going to remember it as soon as we go off. Congressman from Colorado, who was just a guy with an Italian American last name, and he began with a T, I think. But he used to his raison d'etre to be in Congress was to be anti-immigrant. And so he talked about migrants in really, personal, disgusting ways. Like, of course, they're able to get across they do this work because, they're built with legs of the size of watermelons. Like somehow it harkens back to like, if we integrate baseball, black people will be too good. We won't, if they're somehow they're stupid but they're good workers or they're good athletes and they put on Latinos and they did it for Filipinos before and they did it to Chinese laborers because we talked about that before. Anybody who does well and face it, after during Jim Crow, African Americans did pretty damn well in cities like Tulsa and Omaha, and they
Mm.
went to places where the extreme racism wasn't going to block them from starting something, and they did because they knew what they needed to do. These were thriving communities, so they literally bombed them. They knew that Japanese Americans were doing pretty well in California, and they interned them. Part of that was economic. Chinese, we had a couple episodes. With Ted Gong, the director of the 1882 Foundation, who talked about, the attempt to drive the Chinese out. We know in Springfield, Ohio, there's a lot corporations that are opening up there saying, well, wait a minute, this is a great working community. And not that any is better than another, but one thing you can say is one advantage that immigrants have that we don't have is, they invested a lot to come across. And, for whatever that is, they took that risk. And I never say immigrants are different, better. And I hate the concept of the model immigrant. And, for every Lake and Riley, there's going to be other people that do, great stuff. But I'm not going to say there won't be people who murder, rape, rob, steal, who were not born in the United States any more than, as a Jewish person, I'm going to, uh, rely on Bernie Madoff and Jeffrey Epstein, being the moral beacons, or, Henry Kissinger, so I think, we take that, that's not even on the table. But I think when people, one thing we know is that, um, my clients who are down in Arkansas, Tennessee, Georgia, South, they're not moving down there because they want to retire for something. They're moving down there because, hey, there's these jobs, and they'll just do them, and that's it. And it's like, look, maybe it has to do with, people from other countries. They don't have as much. People haven't risen to the middle class, so they're not doing this work, or their kids aren't doing it. Whatever it is, it happens that way. And wiping out whole communities like they're trying to do in Springfield, um, just destroys, I don't like when we just talk about economics and all, but it destroys the fabric of places. And, you know, I think people are going to put their foot down and just say no after a while. No, because it's stressful. I mean, the stories are stressful. The stories of towns in segregation are stressful because it's on your mind all the time.
Yeah.
And getting to the point where it doesn't matter. I mean, the fact that everybody's guessing who's legally here, who's not legally here, who is this, and it's like, if people ask me that question, I'm like, why a tutorial? I'm not going to give you that necessarily. You may ask me some questions, but that's not the central point. The central point is, you know, there are laws out there if you really want to know. I mean, we do talk about it on the show, but it's more like Minneapolis was not about immigration because those people were all mostly in status. Uh,
Mm.
um, and there's a lot of refugees in Memphis. There's a lot of people uh, in throughout rural America, North Dakota, places where refugees are settled. And we see that. So, I mean, it's really important. Uh, you know, you're not gonna make an immediate change, but the fact that you're there, the fact that you have this presence, and the fact that you have this alternative, at least stop what's going on. And then the next step, I think, is an alternative um view of things, an alternative of like, wait a minute, these are part of our community. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the alter sadly, the alternative view is let's follow the Constitution of the United States of America, right? Let's believe what the Declaration of Independence says. Let's believe what the promises that are in the Constitution. And we see that over and over. If you when you go through things like the legacy sites museums and the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, you see over and over and over how people who are oppressed trust the system and believe the lies. No, they're not lies. Believe the truths that are included in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, that those who are in power and authority turn into lies and use against them. But here's the good news. Here's the good news.
Mm.
Minneapolis was a nightmare, right? Minneapolis was the absolute example of what an out of control federal government can do to destroy a city. Because at the end of the day, even after all the federal troops left, or all of them leave, you've got businesses that are destroyed, families' lives that are destroyed, grocery stores, community grocery stores that are not going to be able to reopen, hardware stores that won't be able to reopen, all those kind of things, because because of that. But in the face of all that, the people stood up,
Hmm.
and the people said no. And
Yeah.
within days, I don't know. I'm going to go on too long and preach because that's who I am. But
Mm.
so 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 uh, uh, within days of uh, 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 of people coming to the movement, the government murders them. Right? That happened in the 60s. It happened with Viola Luiso on the road between Selma and Montgomery. Right? It happened with Renee Good and with Alex Predis and but in the face of all that, the people said no. And what made a difference in Minneapolis is the people standing up and saying, "This is not us. We don't agree with this. We don't want this to be a part of who we are." And I think people like you, your podcast, but the work you do otherwise, people that I'm lucky enough to meet and work with, that's what's going to make the difference, and
And you see
that's
the hope
where the
there.
hope is. Jesse, we're
Yeah.
going to go back to you worked for him in '88. You know what he said.
Yeah.
America can be better.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. One of the kind of positive things about watching Jackson was it's interesting because the president with the best speech, and believe me, I've seen Clinton and I've seen Obama, and if you were to, and I've seen Biden all speak, and if you were to tell me that Biden would have the speech that Jesse Jackson Jr. didn't critique and didn't jump on because the other two they kind of knew they were working in a new Democratic thing. Their legacies were attacked. They were Biden, people didn't know it as Jesse Jackson Jr. didn't like the fact that they kind of made it partisan because one thing about Jesse Jackson that you remember is that he went to Syria when Reagan was president and got his hostage out, and the Democratic establishment was saying, "Oh no, it's during an election year. You're going
Yeah.
to advantage him." He said, "No, no," and Reagan was with him. He supported Jack Kemp, who was one of the most conservative congressmen, ran for vice president, but he was anti-racist. And he believed in no government, no government assistance, but maybe you give a block grant, like all of these conservative ideas that are often used in racist ways. He's like, no, I want these block grants in these black neighborhoods. And he was walking with Operation Push and with Jesse
Hmm.
Jackson in a different way. And Jackson was like, I don't care if you have some banker friend who's going to loan it. It's not from the government. However, that all works. We just need to get the money in here, and we need people. If you have a different ideology, as long as you're not a racist, and that's, I think, what. And it was a clear idea of what is right, and it included workers' rights. It included no, you don't you don't punch down, and you don't compete for things that are right. And I think where that's where I think we need to go. And I think that's where we're going pretty slowly. But these guys are, I mean, I'm really encouraged by a lot of the same things you're seeing. I'm encouraged that the mayor of Philadelphia was able to say that, and there wasn't a ton of pushback. I'm encouraged by the fact that they haven't left Minneapolis. I know I have people up there that I've talked to who've been there. They're not leaving
Right.
Minneapolis yet, but they're also understanding. I mean, two people have lost their jobs for at DHS, two main people, Bovino and Nome, for grifting and using the position for media and not looking credible. And, Americans, a couple things bother them. One, the cost of things and consumers, but also people who they view as fake or people that they view as like grifting. And when that
Mhm.
comes out, it's not good. So I think that there's um the pushback, the movements are going on. You're doing some great work. Thank you for all you're doing, and we'll visit back, and I know you'll bring some others next time. I know it's a crazy week, but
I will. My friend that would have been here with me today, Joni Laney, she's it's her husband's birthday celebration and they're in Costa Rica. But she does a wonderful job of connecting what's happening to migrant children in the United States with with what's happening to other children around the world. So yeah, if we have a chance to
Good.
talk again, I'd
Oh no,
love.
we will. We will. And one of the other things that I just wanted to shoot out there on that one, and I'm finishing a Substack piece on, and we're going to talk about is this, you know, when we talk about foreign policy, how it affects people here. And one of the things is that the United States starving out Cuba also means Cuba's main source of income. Cuba doesn't sell arms. Cuba sells medical personnel, doctors, and that's who they send as the government, and they receive money in return. And so during COVID, Italy used Cuban doctors, and the Caribbean has used them, and they were treating tropical diseases in Brazil. And the United States is pushing governments to kick those doctors out. Um, and saying that they are being exploited because they're not paid like doctors here. And so they're being exploited, and some countries have, and some countries haven't. Guatemala, Honduras have, but the Caribbean is holding tight, and interestingly, Grenada hasn't. So this is one of those things that I'm kind of looking at because it means that the victims of this foreign policy are rural Guatemalans who often are migrating to the United States out of poverty, desperation, violence. Many of the gangs that left El Salvador are there. They're in a crisis, and what are you doing? You're taking away their health care. You're taking away their clinics. You're taking that away, and
Mm,
you're people will die. People will die. People will live in sickness, and those aren't. There's no part of the Bible that would ever condone that. There just
no.
isn't, and that's
Or any faith traditions, whether it's
no,
based on the Hebrew scriptures or the Christian scriptures
yeah,
or the Torah, the Quran, whatever. And
yeah.
you know, when you were saying that, I was thinking, you and I, either you or I, could parachute into the poorest community in Cuba with the most horrendous cancer ever. And even though we were Americans that parachuted in, we would get all the health care and the best health care available to us from the Cuban government, you know. And that says something about who we are when we don't want to do that, or even our citizens.
I mean, and how, hey, I hate to say it, the United States has some things to teach, no question, but damn, if we can't learn from a country that has 99% literacy overnight, if we can't learn
Yeah.
from a country like China that builds cities, I mean, we got a metro line here connecting the whole subway system, and my son said to me, Dad, that was approved in 2004 and it's 90% complete now. And we're talking about one subway line above ground. And so, if we can't learn from, and that's the thing is when the world is viewed competitively, then people are viewed competitively.
Yeah.
And, so well, Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much.
We'll talk soon.
All right.
Oh, I just wanted before we go, I wanted to thank producer Stephanie Buatois. The music is Jeff Barsky, Insect Factory, and Pete Kovitz. Um, and again, thank you, Larry. Have a great day, everyone.
Absolutely.